Dr. Jared Barnes, a dedicated horticulturist, started cultivating his love for gardening at the age of 5, and now he's an award-winning associate professor of horticulture at Stephen F. Austin State University. He's earned recognition for his outstanding contributions. With a PhD in horticulture science from North Carolina State University, Dr. Jared brings a wealth of knowledge to his role, and he's the esteemed host of the Plantastic podcast, one of my favorites, and the author of the weekly newsletter, Plant Ed. He passionately shares his expertise. So Dr. Jared's received accolades such as the 2021 Teaching Excellence Award and the 2019 Perennial Plant Association's Academic Award, showcasing his dedication and impact to the field of horticulture. Please welcome with me, Dr. Jared. Good to see you again. Thanks for being here.
Great to see you too, Julie. I'm thrilled to be here today. And again, looking through the names, I recognize some like Tim Boland. It's great to see you on there as well too. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and we will get started today. Okay. All right. So again, I want to say thanks to Julie for coordinating this. Thanks to ELA as well too for asking me to come speak. And of course, thanks to the sponsors as well that helped to make this such a great and valuable experience. So today I'm going to be talking about teaching horticulture and the things that we have to think about when we're sharing our love of plants. So just a little bit about me before we get started. All right. So love gardening since I was 5 years old, and now oversee the plantry and our horticulture program here at SFA. So in the fall, our students and I, we opened up a brand new 7,000 square foot trial garden for native plants. So everything you see here was built by students. And so for me, it's a real passion and a pleasure as a professor to see all the amazing things that students do and build and create. And again, just kind of leading them on this journey of learning. On top of that, too, I, of course, garden at home. So this is a photograph of our garden here in spring in East Texas. So we still get about 50 inches of rainfall. We may just get like 1/5 of that in a weekend in January like we did a month ago. So nevertheless, it's a really cool place to grow plants and learn about how plants grow. So for me, teaching is a lot like cultivating a garden in that horticulture is a craft and teaching is also a craft. So being able to figure out ways that we can share information with students, whether they are students sitting in the classroom, workshops you're hosting as a garden center or a landscaping business, or again, trying to reach people with content online through social media, newsletters, videos, whatever may be working. And so when we're thinking about, again, sharing this information, we've got to keep two things in mind. Just like a garden, you have a lot of different plant species that are, of course, in your garden. Same thing with students, that students are, of course, are a wide diversity of different organisms that come to us at the university with a wide different varying range of backgrounds. And our goal is to try to help them to learn to grow plants and be very successful with horticulture. But the other thing too is that we've also got to think about how do we create a hospitable environment for them. So just like in my home garden, I have tried my best to figure out how to grow plants that normally might not grow well here in East Texas because our soils are too acidic or too warm. How do we try to grow plants in such a way that, again, we've created an environment? So we got to think about the biology of the learning organism, of the growing organism, but we've also got to think about the environment that we create for them too. And so in today's presentation, that's what we're going to be talking about is things that we can do to engage with people with learning, the science of learning, but then also how do we create an environment as well too that's hospitable for learning for people. So one of the first things we need to think about when we're looking at teaching people is that we first have to germinate the passion and love of plants. That at some point in time, for all of us who are in this session, we had some experience with the plant. It could have been a seed, a flower, someone introduced us to something, but there was something that happened to us that basically introduced us and allowed us to start having this passion for sowing plants and growing plants to germinate. And so I really like to think about the way that we cultivate this, just like the way that we cultivate seeds, that for seeds to germinate, they have to imbibe water. They have to take something in for that growth to begin occurring. And so it's the same thing with students. You know, we have students that come through our program who have never sown a seed in their entire life. I mean, pause and think about that for a second. We have students that are, again, 18, 19, 20 years old who come into my class. my intro horticulture class, and they've never sown a seed in their entire life. And a lot of them have also never kept a plant alive in their entire life. But then for them to sow the seed and then go out and grow it and see that it can turn into something that's beautiful and delicious, and it just shocks them whenever you reach down and break off a piece of a plant, and they're like, is this edible? And you just stick it in your mouth and chomp away, that they're just shocked that you can eat something without having to wash it, which is kind of crazy. But again, what we're doing is with this intro horticulture class is we're really trying to help students imbibe the passion for plants, that as they go through the class, having them absorb this interest, absorb the wonder of plants. And really, whenever we're thinking about sharing the love of plants and having them imbibe, we have to do more than just plant labels. And so, for example, this plant label here goes a lot into detail about how beautiful this plant is and how it grows. But I want to know the stories. I want to know the things that make this plant unique and wonderful and just what makes it truly amazing. And the reason why is because there's research out there that shows us that wonder is the thing that really kickstarts our passion for plants to really start germinating and growing. That when we see things that are bigger than ourselves, that make us wonder and be curious about the world, then suddenly we begin to build these connections with nature, and we start to feel like there's something bigger than us in the world. So for example, basil seeds are a great example of this. Basil seeds, when they get wet, 10 minutes later, they start to form a gelatinous coat around the outside of the seeds. And so if you're germinating seeds with students or kids, this is a really great example of a seed that very quickly you're going to see a change on, because that's one of the things we have to do is teach people patience with plants. But it's nice if you can have these little wins early on to show them that something is beginning to happen. Or it could be something too about just sharing the wonder of plants as well. Like for example, Kalmia. Kalmia had those stamens that when a pollinator lands in them, all of a sudden those stamens start bopping them because again, they're kind of spring loaded. And so they'll start pummeling them with pollen. And that's just, again, one of the fascinating stories that we can share about plants. And so when we're thinking about cultivating this passion, we have to think about how do we get people to imbibe the wonder of the plant world in horticulture? And so the reason I keep hitting on wonders is that wonder has been shown to be one of these things that really connects people with the greater outside world. So this is an example of this. This is a photograph that was taken using high-end technology that they use to model jet engines on military planes. And what they did is they applied this technology to visualizing a cough and a sneeze. And so what they were trying to do is they were trying to show how whenever this volume of air comes out of your mouth, what it actually looks like. And so the reason I'm sharing this picture with you is that in 2008, when we had so many other things going on in the world, we had a massive election that happened that year as well too. This was one of the most shared articles on the New York Times website, the mysterious cough caught on film. And again, October 27th, 2008, that was right just a week or so before that big election that happened in 2008. But yeah, this is one of the most shared articles on the New York Times website. And so Jonah Berger discussed this in his book, that wonder is one of these things that, again, makes us feel connected to the outside world, makes us feel connected to everything else around us. And again, it starts to germinate this passion, this interest in exploring things further. And so there is research that delves into this idea about awe and wonder and its benefits as we explore it. It's just like going and standing at the Grand Canyon and feeling like there's something bigger in this world than you. The same thing can also be held in your hand with seed germinating and starting to see new life sprout. We just have to share that with other people and teach them about it. We also want to think about the science of learning as well, too. So besides imbibing wonder and talking about how we want to take that in to start cultivating that passion, once we have that passion cultivating, we want to start thinking about, okay, how do we get people to start learning about growing plants? How do we get them to start being successful? How do we get them to know that after you put a plant in the ground, you have to water it? Some of these things. And so there's a great book out there, Uncommon Sense Teaching by Barbara Oakley, and she goes into depth in this book about strategies that you can use to help teach. She goes into the science of it and then explains strategies you can use. And it's well written. It's written for both professors as well as students and their parents to help them learn. And so one of the things that she talks about is that, when we learn things, we basically have two systems for learning. We have a declarative memory where we're learning things like facts and figures. This could be something like scientific names, This could be something like recognizing plant organs and specifically what they are, and being able to repeat that later on. Could be something about learning about where a provenance is for a particular species, studying where something came from. And so this is declarative, where again, you're holding these things in your mind, in your working memory, and then you're trying to store it long term in your neocortex, that long term storage area in your brain. Procedural memory is different. It's basically learning how we do things. So this is going to be more of our tactile memory. Like for example, how do you take a cutting? How do you go about grafting? How do you sow seed? The first time that we've ever done those type things, we're usually very, very rusty at it. It takes practice to do both of these things better. And so again, she delves into different approaches, and I'm not going deep into the science of this because again, we're trying to focus on plants and how we learn about them. But the takeaway is that again, we have these two systems, and one for learning new knowledge and information, one for learning the practices of things. And the takeaway is that what we have to do is we have to try to figure out ways to weave these two together. We have to figure out ways that we can try to integrate these two together so that we can make sure that we're enhancing learning. So, sometimes you'll hear about people who, do dances in the classroom to emulate how photosynthesis is occurring. That's trying to play off both of these systems so they can work together so that we can retain that information better. And the biggest takeaway about both of these systems is that both systems rely upon practice. And I think as horticulturists, this is something that we forget, that we think that if we tell people once, how they should water something or how they should be growing particular plants or how they should be doing things in their gardens, we think that's it. We kind of check off a box in our head that we've done it. But the thing, and that we've shared that knowledge and therefore it's been retained. But we have to remind ourselves that, there's kind of this thing called the curse of knowledge, where we are experts. We know this thing very well. Other people who are more amateurs, they don't know it as well. And so they have to practice these skills, whether it's, practicing names or provenance or practicing grafting or sowing seeds. They have to practice these approaches so that they can try to retain that. And so when we're thinking about practicing, we want to talk about what are the techniques that we have to learn new information. And another really good book that I'm going to share with you, that if you're really interested in learning about learning, is the book Make It Stick. And these three authors, what they did is they went through the research and they found out that there are 3 core strategies that people can use to learn new information. And in my intro horticulture class, I take a whole lecture to teach students about how we want to think about learning new information, because I say, if you can take these skills and apply them the rest of your life, you're going to be very, very successful, and you're not going to be wasting your time using other techniques like highlighting or rereading. So let's go through these 3 strategies that really help us learn about information, because not only can you use these, but also as you're thinking about delivering content, whether it's again to the classroom, workshops, or content online, you can try to think about ways that you can integrate this into your teaching and education. So the first technique, and this is the most powerful technique they talked about in their book, is self-quizzing. As they say in the book, quizzing arrests forgetting. That this process of going through and quizzing yourself about things, and we do it all the time as horticulturists. You may practice scientific names in your head, or you may try to remember where something is, or you may try to ask yourself, who was it that discovered this plant? Self-quizzing is what is going to help you arrest forgetting over a period of time. So an example of this, one of the first wildflowers that I learned, and it's one of my absolute favorites, is blooming right now at our house here in East Texas, is Claytonia virginica. But I did not come out of the womb knowing this was Claytonia virginica or spring beauty. I didn't know that, of course, it has these beautiful flowers that start white and then can change colors towards pink once they've been pollinated. I didn't know that, again, those little storage corms underneath the ground were once used by food as Native Americans. But again, I'm self-quizzing myself on this plant. And that's kind of how I started learning plants at a young age, is I would read about them in books, and then I would quiz myself on them later to try to remember, do I actually remember that name or not? And some of my horticulture friends, they've played games like Stump the Chump, where they'll just randomly ask questions. Do you know what this is? Or can you think of a plant that's not variegated? It's one of those things. Space retrieval is the second strategy that science shows us really helps us retain and remember information. And what spaced retrieval is it's basically the spaced out retrieving of the knowledge that you're getting with self-quizzing. And so with spaced retrieval, what you're doing is you're basically recalling things at longer intervals of time. And what that's going to do is that's going to really help you establish and really help you ingrain that knowledge in your head. And so one of the things that I love about horticulture is that every year we practice space retrieval, because every year there's the same wildflowers that are blooming, there's the same plants that are emerging out, there's the same ways that the insects and the animals are interacting with those plants. And so, look at any bloom calendar out there. Like, for example, this one here is Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. That's one of the cool things, again, about investing in horticulture is that we basically every year have this space retrieval when, the bluebonnets start blooming or the evening primroses start blooming. We see them come up. We think about the common names. We think about how people have used those throughout history. We think about other ways that we can use them as dyes or the benefits they have for animals. And so again, just seeing these plants is kind of an artificial way of doing space retrieval. In the classroom, I just tell students, make a deck of flashcards, study them 1 week, study them 2 weeks later, a month later, and just keep spacing that out. And I even know some people who keep these flashcards going later throughout life, even with plant names or other facts or figures as well too. So spacing out the retrieval of that information is a second science-based strategy for learning knowledge. And then the last type of learning that research has shown really helps people learn is what's called interleaving. And this is the one that whenever I tell students, they kind of go like, they start to panic a little bit, because with interleaving, what you're doing is you're starting to mix together different types of content. You're starting to weave them together. So instead of having a stack of flashcards for plant ID and a stack of flashcards for plant propagation, you instead mix those two decks together. And maybe even for some of you out there who use flashcards in college, probably get a little bit anxious even hearing that, because we've all gotten the decks of flashcards mixed up in our backpacks before or fallen on the ground. But the research shows that actually mixing things up helps you enhance your learning. And in the book, they talked about two different examples that I'll share with you really quickly. Baseball players, they had baseball players who hit balls, 15 fastballs, 15 slow balls, 15 curveballs. They have another group that hit the same 45 total balls, but they mixed them up, brought them back a couple weeks later. The ones that mix things up remember better and perform better in that exercise. And again, the reason why is that you're not getting into just that flow of what you've learned. Instead, you're mixing it up. It mimics more the real world. Another study they shared in this book is that they had kids, one group of kids threw a ball at a basket 3 feet away, another group of kids threw balls at baskets 2 or 4 feet away. They brought them back again a couple weeks later, and the ones that had been practicing 2 or 4 feet away hit the 3-foot bucket better than the group who had practiced on the 3-foot bucket earlier in that study, even though they had never thrown that in that 3-foot bucket, which is just, to me, is amazing, because again, you're starting to gauge different things. You're starting to notice different things in the world. And to me, interleaving is really just like real world is, that whenever we're teaching students, oftentimes we're trying to weave different topics together to create more complex problems. So for example, we did a trial gravel garden here on campus. It's about 400 square feet. And so in this practice, we had to calculate how much cubic yards of gravel to buy. We had to think about design. How do we group these plants together? We had to read designs. We had to think about how do we plant them in the ground and make sure that they don't have weeds and stuff in those root balls when we're putting them in the ground. There's a lot of interleaving that's going on there. And so, sometimes people will try to focus on learning and mastering content all at once, but the research shows that if we mix it up and integrate it together, that you're going to enhance learning. So, don't feel bad if you're mixing topics together to teach people. Oftentimes that may help to strengthen those bonds even further in learning. The other thing too to think about as we're being educators is we need to be rooting hormones. And what do I mean whenever I say a rooting hormone? Well, if you're sticking in a cutting, one of the things you got to think about is that this is now an immature plant. Basically, this is a plant that doesn't have everything it needs to survive. And so whenever we stick cuttings, like you see my students here who have stuck cuttings in these different trays, oftentimes we treat things with rooting hormone to try to enhance their growth. And so when I say be a rooting hormone, what I'm saying is that, again, we need to be encouraging to people who are growing plants, even if it's plants that, we don't necessarily like or think, are good for people to try to grow. We need to think about ways that we can encourage them, because we never know what the love of plants is going to lead to. And so I much more encourage people to have small wins and small victories than for people to have failures early on and then peter out in their passion for plants. So I'm going to share a story with you. This is my friend Rebecca, and Rebecca, of course, loves the United Kingdom. She went over there and did a study abroad. She has an Instagram account where like I think 100,000 people follow her, and she just talks about like what's going on in the royal family. So evidently, people who don't grow plants have other passions. So when she was in England, she bought this plant. And so you and I would likely look at this and think, ah, a cyclamen, but this is not a cyclamen. This is Lady Margaret because she named it after one of the royal family members. And so at first, Lady Margaret and stuff was doing great, blooming its little head off, etc. But then shortly after a couple of weeks, suddenly Lady Margaret started to go down and she started to lose her flowering potential. She started having some yellowing leaves, etc. And so she contacted me saying like, help, my plant is dying. What do I need to do? And I was like, okay, be patient because of course this cyclamen, is just kind of starting to slow down growth, but I promise you it's going to put on a new flush of leaves and it's going to look better. Again, just because it has some yellowing leaves on the bottom, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's toast and dying. So what happened was that again, later on, she sent me this message. She said, seriously, the journey of my plant fascinates me. It was just going dormant, like you said, and now all the old leaves are turning yellow and dying, but there are tons of new green ones growing and filling it out now. I never had a plant live long enough to see this process. Hooray! So she's keeping a plant alive. And the next line that I have covered up here really stuck with me. Glad I checked with you before I threw it away. And so this is what we have to remember, that with some of these people who are growing plants and starting out, they don't have these experiences. They don't know about dormancy yet. They don't know about stratification. They don't know about some of these things that, of course, are essential and that we, again, know about. And so we've got to think about ways of being rooting hormones that, as we're helping people take root into this wonderful world of horticulture, we have to be encouraging. Too often I've seen people just shoot people down or say, no, that's wrong, or why would you ever do that in a garden, etc. Well, we have to remember patience and love and kindness really go a long way sometimes. Some of you are probably cringing at this photograph, much like I did the first time I ever saw these, because, it's almost like I feel like somebody spray painted my children and it makes me feel uncomfortable. But the thing is that we never know how somebody buying one of these and engaging with it and interacting with it, could that one day lead to a love of something like this? I think a lot of us didn't start out with ecological gardening or ecological horticulture backgrounds. We may have started out with cut flowers or vegetables or houseplants. But again, as you begin to love creatures and all this wonderful natural world around us, you start to want to love it even more as you continue to engage with. And so that's why I really encourage people to be rooting hormones and root for those amateur gardeners that are around you. Also, show your blooms. As we're teaching people, we've got to make sure that we're showing them our blooms. And so what do I mean by that? Well, years ago, whenever I lived in a rental house, I had a beautiful Magnolia ashii. This, of course, is an endemic species down in Florida, and I loved it because, of course, it had these large leaves on it. Well, I was thrilled to come home one day and find that this blossom had started to appear at the top. And so, again, I photographed its development. This is one morning I was leaving, and it was just starting to open up that beautiful chalice. And then by the time I had come on, again, this beautiful flower here, almost about the size of almost like a little solo cup, had just opened up and started to bloom itself. And this is right outside on my patio where, again, people coming by and stuff could engage with that and see that. But whenever I say show your blooms, I'm basically saying that, whenever we're planting gardens out, we've got to make sure that our gardens are beautiful. This is a photograph that I took in Texas. And this is using, one of these ornamental muley grasses that people like to grow here in East Texas and up towards the Dallas area. But this is not beautiful. This looks hideous. I think they're trying to go after that more modern grass look, but still having something like this is not attractive. And so when I'm saying show your blooms, I'm saying that, we need to put our gardens in our front yard. We need to have things that are beautiful, that people can engage with and see are attractive. And part of that, again, comes with concepts of design like legibility and complexity and coherence. But, this is the front of our agriculture building. And so when people come by, they see beauty. They see the liatris. They see the Rudbeckia and the black-eyed Susans. They see the yuccas. They see the Aragrostis below. Now, sometimes of the year, when we're waiting to cut them back because we want to make sure we leave our stems up for our insects and stuff, they may be saying, well, why haven't you cut that down yet? But again, that's just another opportunity of education. So, I heard someone say once, people need to put more of their gardens in their front yards. We love having gardens in our backyards, but why don't we put more of our gardens and beauty in the front yards where people can drive by and see them and engage with them? I feel like in horticulture, the whole concept of a garden comes from an Old English word "giard," which means fence. And I feel like oftentimes in gardens, we have this idea of, like we're going to garden in this enclosed, protected space. No, we need to be spilling flowers out. Outside of that fence and sharing them with our communities and people around us. And so when I lived in grad school, I did that. I went from living on 150 acres back in Tennessee to having a 150 square foot patio in Raleigh. And so one of the things that I did is I collected all kinds of plants from, tropicals and natives and ornamentals, et cetera. I've got a variegated oak leaf hydrangea in there. Excuse me, a gold leaf oak leaf hydrangea. So my goal was just try to grow everything I can because again, I loved reading about Christopher Lloyd and how he made those mixed pot designs. And yeah, this is a little intense, I will agree. But what happened was it started giving me opportunities to have conversations with my neighbors. For example, my neighbor saw that I had this cabbage looking thing out growing on the patio. And this is a guy that had not one single plant on his entire patio. He lived kind of upstairs above me. He loved hockey. You could hear him screaming out at night when the hockey game was on, celebrating wins or losses. But he was like, hey, man, that cabbage looking thing is really cool on your patio. And I said, oh, you mean this Echeveria? And he said, yeah, that's really cool. And I said, well, here, I've got an extra one if you want. So, I handed it up to him because he was on the second floor. And so I came home a couple days later and he had that little Echeveria there. And he was like, man, I got to researching this online. And he started telling me like where it came from and everything else. And then soon what happened is that he started having other plants appear on his patio. So again, sometimes that's what we have to do is, again, we just have to create a space, create an environment for learning to happen and for people to see that you can be successful with growing plants. And it's not just, with education, we have to do that. Part of us too is that we think, oh, well, plants should just be able to sell themselves because they're wonderful and we see how wonderful they are. But there was a really interesting experiment that was done. Again, this is a miniature experiment that was done a few years ago. It was by Gene Weingarten. He set up this experiment in a Washington Post article asking the question, can one of the nation's great musicians cut through the fog of a DC rush hour? And so this, of course, is Joshua Bell. And so here's the experiment that he set up. Joshua Bell, famous musician. He typically sells tickets in the hundreds of dollars. If I take him and I give him a $3.5 million Stradivari violin crafted in 1713, in fact, Joshua Bell said that he was so worried about the expenses of losing this that he took a taxi one block just because he was afraid of carrying it out in the public. And then if I give Joshua Bell this violin and I have him play for 45 minutes in DC rush hour with over 1,000 people passing by, how much will he make? So again, one of the most famous musicians in the world, one of the most expensive violins in the world, and 45 minutes in front of 1,000 people in DC rush hour. How much potentially would Joshua Bell make? So this is the question he's asking. So again, I'm going to give you a second to ruminate on this. Think about how much Joshua Bell made. And so let's see the answer. $32.17. $20 of that came from a woman who knew who he was and thought she had the bargain of her life. So again, this is a scenario. This is a really interesting miniature experiment that he set up, basically asking the question of, even if we have something that's very, very valuable and we take it out of context or people don't know the context, do we really appreciate what it is? And so again, kind of thinking about showing our blossoms, we sometimes have to share the stories about how important, how valuable things are. Because I feel like too often we deal with this, right? We go to garden centers, we see the plants on the discount racks. They're just cheap, they're just commodities, they're just thrown away. And we have to try to figure out ways of breaking through that. And to me, one of the ways that we can break through that, of course, is to tell stories. Stories are another way that we can share the wonder with our audiences of people that we're trying to engage and educate. And so Ty Montague wrote this article a few years ago in the Harvard Business Review, and he talks about this really fascinating project called the Significant Objects Project. And so what they did is they went out and they bought about $128 worth of just junk at yard sales, just collected things, etc. And then they paid professional writers to write stories about those objects, and then they put them up on eBay. And so again, they bought $128 of junk. How much did they make by selling it with one of these professionally written stories? So again, I'll give you a second to kind of think about that. And let's see what the answer is. So $128 worth of junk, and they sold this junk for a total of $3,612. They increased the value of this junk by 28 times just by attaching a story to it. So again, this is why I mentioned earlier, too often we see plant tags and we see hardiness zone 8, or, needs this much water, or needs this much light. I want to know who discovered it. I want to know who bred it, who selected it. I want to know how this plant engages with the wildlife and the insects where it grows. I want to know how this plant is a home, an ecological home for something, or how it supports other things. And we're getting so much better about telling those stories about the benefits of plants and the roles they play in our ecosystems, but we just need to do a better job of it. So the other thing I want to ask you too is, how often do you bloom? Because different plants bloom at different times. For example, these Texas bluebonnets, they bloom with a massive show in the spring, set seed, but again, I can count on them coming back at regular intervals. I can count on, every fall I'm going to have these seeds germinate in my garden, start popping up, and then start to grow and come back every year. So the question is, how often do you bloom? How often are you coming back and engaging with your audiences or with your classrooms or with your workshops? So there's many thought leaders out there, but two of my favorites are Seth Godin and Justin Wells. Seth, I've been following for at least now almost 10 years. Justin as well, too. I've started following him more recently. But there's this concept out here in the knowledge content generation environment where you create something on a regular interval that people start expecting. So for example, over 10 years ago, Seth Godin said, I'm going to start writing a blog post every day. And for the past 10 years, that's what he's done. He has written a blog post every day. It may be short, it may be long, but the whole point is that he has regularly shown up every week doing that. Justin Welsh, he took a different approach. He's posting things twice a day on LinkedIn. He's now starting to do stuff on Twitter, but every Saturday, again, he sends out newsletters to people sharing things about what's going on, about advice they can use in life, advice they can use for creativity, etc. So the question is, how often are you blooming and showing up for people in your world? For example, are you giving garden talks or hosting gardening workshops regularly at your place of business? Are you going and visiting schools? I put this picture in because this is one of the first garden talks I ever gave back in 2007. So over 15 years ago, I was up in front of a crowd at a local garden show, maybe 50 people in the audience or so, but still, for me, getting up and getting practice and engaging with people, sharing that knowledge of plants, that's something that we can do, again, trying to connect with our audiences. Or maybe you're a teacher in a classroom. Are you regularly showing up with creative ideas? Are you regularly engaging with your students? Like you see here, they're doing a seed germination activity here at SFA, trying to help understand the different effects of gibberellic acid and smoke water on germination. And then, of course, are you also showing up online? Like here, this Ecological Landscape Alliance Instagram account. Are you showing up and sharing information about things that you're learning and things that you're doing? I think sometimes we get too caught up on trying to go viral or doing, the latest dance or whatever, etc. But really, it's just showing up and saying, here's what I'm seeing, here's what I'm learning, and here is the biggest thing. Here is how I can help you. Being kind, sharing information, sharing people, trying to help build people up who are under us. We've got to figure out ways of, again, blooming and showing up and being present for people around the country, in our communities, and etc. So I'm going to ask you, as part of this educational talk, to commit to sharing something every day or every week, something about plants. Plants, unfortunately, they can't talk. I've tried. I promise I've tried. But plants can't talk, but we can, and we can show up and share information with people so that way they can learn and they can grow better. And I know sometimes that's very scary early on. You're like, well, I don't know what to say, or I don't know what I should be talking about. And we just sit there with that blank page or blank cursor trying to figure out. Well, again, the tools have started to change now where we can do a lot of really neat things. For example, this is ChatGPT. And I typed in for today's presentation, I typed in generate 10 topics that would be helpful for me to share with ecologically minded gardeners as they start spring. And so it generated things like native plant selection, water conservation techniques, composting basics, pollinator-friendly gardening, organic pest control methods, permaculture principles, and it listed some other ones down there, but you kind of get the idea that we're now in an age and a day where, we can use other tools like artificial intelligence to help us come up with ideas. Artificial intelligence it's a wonderful servant. It's a great tool to bounce ideas off, etc. But it's a horrible master, just like fire, because oftentimes things may not be 100% accurate in this. So again, that's where your horticultural background needs to come in. You can use these to kind of play off ideas, etc. Because again, I know sometimes people are just having struggle. They don't know what content to generate. They don't know what people are interested in, etc. But again, we can use these tools. We can have conversations almost with these programs and ask, like, well, what are some holes in this argument? Or what are some things that I haven't thought about for this? And you can start using this to generate content on a weekly or even daily basis if you want to. However, as we're sharing content, one of the things that we have to ensure is this accuracy. Now, we've all been wrong at some point in time, and that's okay. I've told students before things that are inaccurate in class, and I come back and fix them later on. I've come back and correct them. That's just part of being human, part of being humble. But as we're sharing information, we just got to make sure that the things we're sharing are not part of our tribe or culture, things that have just been replicated and said. Instead, it's really good if we have the science and data to back that up. So for example, this is a fun thing that I like to share with students. I ask them the question, who all has seen one of these memes before? Flip bell peppers over to check their gender. Ones with 4 bumps are female because they're even, and ones with 3 bumps are male because they're odd, because, males are a little odd. I could say that because I'm a male. But this is 3 different memes that I found online from 3 different places. And of course, if you know plant biology, you know that this is not true because, again, the fruit contains the baby seeds. And typically it's that female tissue that contains baby seeds or baby animals, again, in organisms. And so that's why we've got to be cautious. So Daniel Kahneman, in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, he talked about, again, we have 2 different systems for analyzing information that's coming at us. So again, being in the educational system and teaching world, we have to think about how people are perceiving information. So we have system 1 and we have system 2. So system 1 is fast, automatic. If I say, what's 3 plus 3, the majority of you out there now are probably thinking sex. So it's something that very quickly reacts. It's something that, again, through self-quizzing, interleaving, and also space retrieval, it's just become automatic. Like if I say, what's the scientific name of orange milkweed, you think Asclepias tuberosa. It just comes automatically to us now. System 2, though, is more analytical. It's slower. It uses more power of the brain. And so it's more easily overwhelmed. So, if I'm like, okay, well, let's come up with 30 plants that would be really good to grow on this rain garden slope, where we need some plants for wet, some plants for dry, and some plants for that mesic zone in between. We would have to sit down and kind of start thinking about, well, is it sun or shade? How much water? What type of soil is it? We're going to have to start analyzing and thinking about that. The other thing too is that oftentimes system 1 kind of directs system 2. And so the reason I say that is because oftentimes when we see something that seems like novel information, when somebody was just creating it to get us to share it, we may just jump on the bandwagon and say, oh yeah, sure, bell peppers are male and female. Yeah, sure, I'll just go ahead and share that information without pausing and activating our system 2 to check it. So an example of this, again, if I say what's 2 times 2, again, y'all are thinking 4. But if I put something up on
what's up, Paul? Oh, you just had the.
Okay. If I put something up on the screen, like for example, what's 37 times 48, we would have to sit down and calculate out, actually, that's 1536, right? So it takes time for us to use this system 2 processing to analyze something. So 37 times 48 is 1536, right? Wrong. It's 1776. So I had a student one time ask me, because I do this activity in class too, and they're like, are you going to lie to us anymore this semester? I'm like, no. This is the only time I will knowingly tell you something that's false. But the reason I say this is that, again, it's really easy for our system 2s to kind of just be led along whenever we're presented with new information without checking it first. So a good example of this is this article came out years ago, and of course stirred up kind of a discussion in horticulture about how we plant trees. And so why you should plant trees in square holes. So other people started picking up and running with this, like Intelligent Living, Sunset.com, and they were saying systematic planting trials have shown that roots are not that good at growing around corners. And I was like, this is really interesting, novel information. And so, of course, as a scientist, I said, I had my Jerry Maguire moment, show me the data. I want to see the data. I want to see what this data is particularly showing. And so I reached out to James and he said, well, this is just something people have talked about here at RHS. Again, this is at the Royal Horticulture Society in England. They said, well, this is just something people have talked about being true. And so I said, I actually wrote a blog post saying, no, you shouldn't plant trees in square holes, and it's 26% more work for you. I did the math because I don't know about you, but I've planted trees in my life and I don't want to have to dig up any more soil than I have to when I'm doing this. If it does work out better, that's great. But again, I don't want to be working harder if I have to. So I was also able to find an article from 1995 here in Texas. Mike Arnold did some research where they did different configurations of planting. They even did stars, because that's what I was thinking, make your angle sharper, maybe a triangle or something. And really they show no establishment effect there on those Quercus virginiana they were doing in that study. So I say all that to say that, again, as we're sharing information, just check your references and make sure that, again, it's accurate information that we're sharing. But again, don't get paralyzed by making sure everything's accurate. You can always come back later and change things, put in redactions, etc., to show it, because it's a lot better to be sharing things on a regular basis and mess up once in a while than to not be putting anything out into the world at all. And then, of course, we can also talk about grafting concepts in education. And when we graft concepts, we really help to enhance learning for people as they're learning new things. And I think that for a majority of you, grafting is not a novel concept. For example, here, this is the tree of 40 fruit, where it was an art project where they grafted 40 different kinds of fruit onto one species. Again, you may not always want to graft that much, but grafting is this concept of connecting two things together to make one composite idea or concept. And so it's like with sowing seeds. We can think about how grafting concepts together in education helps us as well too. We actually have terms for these. We call them analogies or metaphors, where again, we're trying to connect things to things people already know. The science shows us that if we're using things like analogies and metaphors, that it really helps to enhance learning. So for example, I could tell you that for seeds to germinate, what are the three things that they need? And so very likely you're already starting to think about water, temperature, and oxygen, right? These are the three things seeds need to germinate. But, if you're just learning this for the first time, you may need something a little bit more to kind of help things bounce around in your head. And so, for example, I've started doing online classes through my website. I have a botanic boot camp, and one of the first ones that I did was on success with seed sowing. So my wife is a graphic designer, and she did this cut flower truck a few years ago. And so I said, you know what? Germinating seeds is a lot like trying to start a car, because with moisture, you got to take something in. It's a lot like putting gas into the truck or the car. Temperature is a lot like your key. And so your key, of course, is essential for getting that in there. If the temperatures are not right, the seeds may not germinate. If you don't have that key in the ignition, same thing too, it's going to be very hard to start that car. And then, of course, oxygen in seed is needed for breaking down those complex compounds. Oxygen, of course, is also necessary for trucks and cars to be able to run for combustion. And so again, just creating a simple analogy of saying like moisture is like gas and temperature is like having the key and oxygen is much like the combustion to get that car running and rolling. That starts to, again, help to connect things in the head and build on concepts that people already know. So with analogies and metaphor, grafting different things together, connecting things that are disparate and showing people how they're similar, of course, really helps to enhance that learning and education. And so we can graft other things into horticulture. Art, Monet. Monet, of course, I've been and visited his garden in France, and it's beautiful. He loved his water lilies so much. He paved the road right next to the pond for the city so that he didn't have to worry about all the dust and debris and stuff blowing into the pond. So he actually made his community better and his paintings better as well too, just by doing that. So again, how do we graft art? Maybe you do painting classes, or maybe if you're teaching class, I have students go out and draw how plants grow out in the environment. They draw them, occurring as ground cover layer or scattered plants or primary plants, or just sitting down and sketching out plant parts, petals, etc. So that's one concept that we can graft into horticulture education. Also, exercise and movement. Research shows us that, again, there's a lot more evidence out there that shows that, if we interact and we are mobile as we're thinking and doing things, we are so much more better thinkers and learners. Research shows that if you exercise after you learn something, you remember something better because there's this brain-derived neurotrophic factor that gets produced. It's almost like fertilizer for your neurons that helps you engage. And so, that's the great thing about horticulture, is that instead of sitting in a classroom saying, here are the steps of how you plant a tree, go out and demonstrate that at a local school or a local park with a tree planting day. Or food. Food, of course, with us in horticulture, this is a beautiful connection that is employed oftentimes. And so I love this here. These are two students that work with me, Tess on the left and Kate on the right. And they're not horticulture students. They are hospitality and human science majors. And so Tess has the background of how do you serve food. Kate has the background of how do you build cakes. And so this is a cake that Kate built and made for our native plant trial garden grand opening last semester. So again, I love it. You can see how she's got the Rebecca on there. She's got the Liatris. She's even got little dahlia flowers on there as well too. So grafting food is another way that we can, again, bridge these connections in horticulture to something outside. And then, of course, we also live in a world where things are fun. And this is one of the things that I really encourage people with horticulture is that we make plants boring. We do. We make plants boring, and yet we live in a world where, we ask, what does the fox say? We pour water over our heads for fundraisers, and we have TV hosts get sock puppets out to demonstrate how, gases are produced in baking bread like Alton Brown does. And so, of course, in this world, I've, of course, asked the question, how can we make horticulture more fun? And again, this is where Super Seed came from originally. This is an alter ego that I know, but you can, of course, see Super Seed here in one of the early costumes I made out of cardboard. And then on the left-hand side, this was something that was celebrated in organic gardening. And actually, I hear something knocking at the door. Let me see. Somebody's here today. Hello, ELA. I am Super Seed, hero of the Kingdom Planta, and I fight against invasive insects, diseases, and even some of those horrible invasive plants as well. I have my cutting cotyledons and my radical and my light harvesting meristem. For those who can harness the power of light should choose against darkness to fight. Now, I can't stay planted in one place for too long, but I must leave and go and fight another day. Until next time, keep growing! Thanks for that, Super Seed. That was really great. I really appreciate you stopping by and saying hi to ELA today. So, as we wrap up today's conversation about how do we make plants engaging and how do we educate people, again, the biggest thing that I can try to share with you and leave you with is reach out. Reach out. Whether you're interacting with students in classrooms, at community centers, at churches, whether you're hosting workshops yourself, whether you're generating content online, figure out a way that you can regularly show up, whether it's posting something online or showing up at a school and helping out, even if it's once a year, somehow figure out a way to show up. Because as we all know the story, John and William Bartram were exploring the Southeast and they found this beautiful, amazing plant called Franklinia. And if they had not reached out and grabbed a couple of those seed off of that plant, put it in their pocket and taken it back to Philadelphia, we might not have this plant anymore, because again, it went extinct somewhere around 1700s into 1700s. 1810 was like the last time it was really seen in the wild. And so that's something too that we've got to take to heart, that as we're trying to engage people with horticulture and educate people with horticulture, we too have to reach out as we're trying to teach people and engage with them. I really hope that you've enjoyed today's talk. Again, if you've loved learning with me, I have 3 opportunities to continue that. As Julie kindly noted earlier, I have my Planted newsletter that I've been sending out for 4 years. I now have over 1,000 subscribers, just broke it this week, so I'm excited to announce that. That QR code is up there and it can be accessed on my website link that's at the very end. Botanic Boot Camp as well. This is something new that I've started to try to help educating people online across the country. So I have educational sessions online. For ELA members, that QR code there will take you to a discount link, 40% off. It's $29. And then last but not least, the Plantastic podcast is another free opportunity you have to learn. So I've interviewed people from across the country having conversations about how we grow plants better. And so education is something we talk on frequently, and how do we, again, educate people. So again, thank you so much, ELA, for inviting me, Julie, Zach, and everybody else. I've had a great time today talking with you, and I look forward to having a deeper conversation. Again, my website and email address is there for you to access. So with that, I'll take questions, or we can again have a conversation about how we teach horticulture better.
Thank you so much, Jared. Wow, and a super seed sighting. Wow, that's just incredible.
Yeah, how about that?
That was really great. Always entertaining for sure and engaging. Yeah, so we have some questions here. Let's see. There was a question. Well, first, the print behind you. Could you talk about that?
Oh yeah, sure. So this is my background. So this is the various varieties of vegetables. So this is in my office, and I think it came from Pop Lab, if I remember correctly. But this is a Christmas gift that my family gave me years ago, probably about 10 years ago. But it showcases all the different classifications of vegetables. So up here are the fruits, and then over here are the flowers that we eat. Down here are the cooking greens. So it's a nice backdrop that I
I
like
love
to
it.
presentations. Yeah.
That's great. Somebody, when you were talking about the ways of interleaving ideas, somebody asked about, can you talk about the technique of interweaving technical and academic content with social and emotional learning? And, as when dealing with adult learning. And they're sharing that, when they taught outdoor education, to elementary schools and middle school, they really, the content stuck a lot better, to integrate things.
The content stuck better for kids versus adults.
Let's see, I taught outdoor ed to elementary school and middle school kids for years, and boy, did that content stick a lot more in their heads when we journaled about it. Sorry, I missed that part.
Okay, so
Yes.
that could be it, is that you're again engaging with another mental process that, you can learn facts and figures, but whenever you start to journal things, you start to develop that more procedural process. And so again, you're kind of bringing both of those together, the declarative and procedural processes. As far as how do you bring things together like that, my advice too is to think of ways that you can have people act out things. So, I've had people before act out germination of a seed. I know that there's dances online for like photosynthesis. I know too, like in my class just this week, we got up and acted out how water molecules move through a plant. There's a lot of research that shows that if you're moving your body in some form or fashion, whether it's writing, drawing, or actually moving it, that the retention of information is a lot better. And so, one of the things that amazes me too is that, I've been in an audiences before and done the germination dance, where again, you get up and get people to act out the process of germination. And you'll get 70-80% of people participating. You'll always have a few, like I've even been in some very male, dominated audiences that I thought, well, they're not going to do this, and they end up doing it. And it's great. You're always going to have some people who don't want to do it, and that's okay. But the people who are there to learn and know what you're trying to do, they really bite onto that. So that's my advice is, again, try to think about ways to make it more interactive. And movement. Movement is really being shown as something. And it is so unfortunate that we have created a culture where people just sit and listen to someone regurgitate information instead of really going through the motions of how you do those things.